I am here with Bryan Reesman, author of the Bon Jovi book, Bon Jovi, the story. How you doing, Bryan?
I'm good.
I thank you so much for coming on. Thanks so much for coming on here at such short notice too. It's,
Sure.
all right, so
Yeah, it's a day.
yeah, it was a day night, and I actually tried to get you on yesterday, which
I
that,
was literally out all day. When he
yeah,
emailed me, I was like, I'm not here.
that's cool
Uh,
though. I'm glad we can
it
make
was
this
funny
work
when I,
here.
I got your friend request. I'm like, this guy's trying to look like Richie Sambora. I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
Well, let me tell you. I'll tell you a story about this book. Now, I got contacted probably a year, maybe a year and a half ago. I don't know
Mhm.
if it was from somebody at Sterling or someone that Sterling hired to get, to
Oh,
contact
yeah, it was
people.
probably the British company. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll explain
so
that in a minute. Yeah.
they told me it was a book coming out, and they were looking for tribute bands and asked to send a photo and this and that. So I sent it. Fast forward, I totally forgot about the book. Didn't know what the name of the book was, and I'm constantly in Barnes and Noble. My kids are in there once a week. They just love buying
Yeah, yeah,
books.
yeah.
And probably 5 to 10, maybe 15 times I picked this book up, your book here, and kind of thumb through it while I'm waiting for them, and never landed on the right page, so I never knew that was the book that they had sent in for. So
Oh, wow.
somewhat, yeah, and it probably for the last probably 4 or 5 months, I picked this thing up in the bookstore and didn't even think twice. So somebody alerted me to it just this week and said, "Hey, you're in this book," and I ended up emailing the lady that had contacted me a year ago. I
Okay.
asked her, I said, "Is this the book that you?" And she goes, "Yeah, that's the book." She was supposed to send me a copy, but I went out and bought one anyway. So now that I have it, I just started reading it. So it's
You know,
about a year and a half. I've, you know, I
it was a learning curve for me because when you start off, they sent books out to whoever I wanted, but I still had to figure out all the different people, and
right,
it was. I mean, I interviewed almost 40 people, but then you have all these other people who submitted photographs and all this other stuff, and I just tried to get the word out as much as I could,
right.
and sometimes it's hard to keep track of just everything. And after I did, after I did the book, I did not listen to Bon Jovi for like 2 months because it was just I only had 4 months to do this. It was just
Yeah.
4 months of 75 to 80, 85% of my time was listening to Bon Jovi.
And it came out in what, November of 2016?
Yeah, they asked me to do it. I signed the contract mid-December. They asked me mid-November of 2015. It was a British company called Elephant Book Company. I'd
Yep.
contributed to a book that was called The Art of Metal, and there was another one called Classic Rock Posters. So they had come to me a year before actually with the idea for a Ramones book, and I had turned it down. A friend of mine was like, "What are you, nuts?" And I said, "Well, honestly, I like the Ramones, but I don't know that much about them. And having been a heavy rock journalist for over 20 years, the one thing you learn is if you really try to write about a band you don't know anything about, or you might like their music, but you really don't know that much about, you can get in a lot of trouble." In Bon Jovi, when they came to me a year later, I was kind of a casual fan, but I actually started getting into them around 2000. That's actually what happened. But I knew about when they came out. I remember when Runaway came out. I remember seeing the ads in Billboard for the first album, wondering who they were. When they got huge and they kind of got quiet in America, then they came back. So I'd seen a lot of the performances. I'd followed all the history. So to me, I was like, you know what? I like Richie's guitar playing. I can get behind that.
Mm-hmm.
So but in 4 months, I had to sort of refresh my memory, and I had to go through all the stuff, especially some of the newer stuff they didn't know as well. But that's actually what made it fun, I think,
Yeah.
because I feel like I came from a fresh perspective, and I have friends who are big fans, and I just, John doesn't like to do official books. I went to his publicist early on. I went to Richie's publicist, and I think Richie's publicist was like, "Is well the band doing it?" And I said, "I don't think so." But so I just went to other people who work with them, and I lucked out. I got some good people to give me some great information.
Well, you're kind of like me. Back when they were first out, I wasn't. I was more into the heavier stuff, like Dio and White Snake and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I
Same
didn't
here.
really concentrate on Bon Jovi until probably really the end of the '80s or early '90s,
Hmm.
and then forgot about him again. And then I just happened to do. Someone asked me if I could fill in for this tribute band. Probably I don't know. It was like 15 years ago now,
Okay.
and I had done the original band thing and all that stuff, and I was doing a cover band, and I said, yeah, I'll just do it. So I learned like 17 songs in a week, and
Wow.
I did the gig, and I had fun. And it's not
Mhm.
the band I'm in now. It's not Bon Jersey. It was a now defunct band, but
Right, right.
I had fun, and they didn't keep me on because they already had a guy who was still learning the songs, even though I had learned the songs in 1 week. So I started my own. It was more,
just like Richie.
well, yeah, I started my own Bon Jovi cover. It was more of a cover band, and just here in Rhode Island. And then I got recruited to fill in for what I'm in now, Bon Jersey, and I've been in this band. I've been in this band for like, I don't know, 10 years now.
Oh wow. So, okay.
But
the tribute band thing was interesting to research because there's a lot of them.
Oh, there are, yes.
I forget the name. There was one in California where Richie kind of appeared and played a couple songs. He surprised him. He was in the audience. It's interesting. The tribute band thing has gotten huge. I mean, in New York, we just got tons of them.
Yeah. And
it's interesting, and it is kind of very telling that for as much as a lot of people like to make fun of the '80s and say it was cheesy, I'm like, well, I would disagree. I mean, let's be fair. Anything becomes cheesy over time.
Yeah.
You know, the '90s stuff is coming back, and a lot of people will look back at that and go, well, that was cheesy. So a lot of stuff holds up, and a lot of stuff you're like,
right.
Not so great.
Yes.
And the stuff that's popular now in 15, 20 years, you can be like, oh,
exactly.
That was so cheesy.
Yeah. We know, just from when you're trying to get gigs, there's a lot of competition out there. And the one good thing about tribute bands that I have to say is, and we get this from a lot of people that come see us, it's ticket prices nowadays are crazy to see the actual band. So we get people that bypass going to see them. They come to see us for $10, or we do a free show, at a casino or something. And they're like, you just saved me, $300-400. And we're kind of seeing this. We're seeing the same show basically. So, it works out. But we've also had people tell us that because of us, they weren't huge Bon Jovi fans, but they saw us and then they went out and bought, whether it be the greatest hits or whatever. So the tribute bands do have a place.
Sure. Yeah.
They do help the real band.
It's interesting. I mean, I think it's rock. It's sort of surreal to see a lot of these bands getting older. I mean, John's 55 now, and Richie's 3 years older, so he's 58. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's sort of strange to see a lot of these guys getting older, and it's like JJ French from Twisted Sister said this to me a couple of times years ago. It's like back when they were coming up, the Beatles lasted 10 years. The most popular rock band ever lasted 10 years. So how do you, no one thought, I mean, I'm a huge Judas Priest fan. I wouldn't have thought, I mean, they've been around technically almost 50 years. I mean, they were formed in 1969. So none of the original members in the band, obviously. They started recording 74. So it's still 43 years they've been recording. It's a long time.
Yeah.
No one thought these guys would be here. Any of these guys. I mean, someone said a joke like, who thought Duran Duran would be around? And it's like, look, Duran Duran is still big.
And it's still touring.
I just went to see a show last night on Broadway, The Play That Goes Wrong. And
is that the one that has the upside down?
Yeah, the marquee.
Yeah, I was in New York probably about a month ago. We went to see Phantom of the Opera, but I remember seeing. I didn't really pay attention to it, but I saw some sign there. I said, did they put that thing upside down, or is that supposed to be?
Well, one of the jokes in the thing is the sound man is a big Duran Duran fan, and he announces to everyone at the beginning of the show, if any of you see a Duran Duran box, it's mine. Bring it back. And a couple times in the show, he accidentally hits Duran Duran as opposed to a sound cue. He's supposed to put up like this pre-recorded orchestral music. So, I mean, they're still around.
Yeah.
And Bon Jovi's done very well. I don't think it was funny when I was approached about doing this book. I mean, I didn't want to do an expose because people had tried to do that, and that it's like there's the joke about them being like the mafia. It's like family business. You don't know what goes on outside of that. Right. Outside of the organization, you don't really know, which is fine. I mean, that you can respect that. But I wanted to make sure. I think that at least I guess my goal was to actually tell the story of all the band members and give you insight into all of them, because I think they have such a rich history, and yet most people just think like John does everything. John doesn't do everything. Right. I mean, yeah, he's the guy who's got the name on the contract. He's the one who is, he's got his own management company after he fired Doc McGee. But you have talented members that have contributed. Richie obviously, as you know, is a major factor in that, and you can hear it. Especially the new album, you don't hear him, and even the one he was on before they left, you could just tell it. John Shanks has this increasing pop influence, and it's like they need to go back to the rock stuff. Yeah. And there are some moments in the new album that are good, but it just doesn't have that soulfulness that it needs. Mm-hmm. The Circle is actually a pretty good record.
Yeah,
I was actually surprised by that.
They're missing that backing vocal, his backing vocal. It's like Lennon and McCartney singing together. Yeah. It's just The other guys are great. I mean, they sing well, they play well. It just you miss it. Just that sound, the Bon Jovi sound is part him and part John singing. You know, it's not there anymore.
And also the high note of Living on a Prayer right before the. You know, I mean, that's the other thing, and I think Richie can hit those notes.
Yeah.
I mean, like, Living on a Prayer is still a popular tune live, but like John hasn't hit that note in like 20 years. And that was what's interesting about that wedding video that surfaced when he was brought up to sing a song. He clearly didn't want to do it, and supposedly they'd asked him beforehand if he wanted to, and he asked them not to. And of course, right during Living on a Prayer, he lets her handle this the thing because he just doesn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
But David Coverdale's not doing that anymore.
No, it's
none of these guys really. I mean, Rob Halford's actually hitting some of the screams, which is pretty. It's impressive. He had a couple surgeries though, and one of them was for a hernia, and that you can hear the difference. Mm-hmm. But it takes him 10 hours to recover from a concert now.
Right.
That's what he told me, and that's a long time. So John's got a lot of other things he's trying to do, including getting into football. So
yeah,
he can't spend 10 hours a day recuperating from it.
He's a busy guy, and he's just sometimes it almost seems like he's got too much going on. And they just postponed their Madison Square Garden shows.
Well, bronchitis, yeah.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine joked, should they just have Richie come in and sing? And
well, what's funny is we just played. We're just at Mohegan Sun in Connecticut this past Saturday, and we played the after party, upstairs after. After their show let out, we played, and the place got packed. People coming out of the arena and came up there. But it was April Fool's Day, and I said, it would have been great if they would have just brought us out there to start the show.
That's a good idea.
And just play and see, and then
see if people notice.
Yeah, and then come running out and get these guys off the stage, the April Fools. That would have been. You don't see a lot of bands doing stuff like that. I thought that would have been cool.
There was a tribute band out here that got sort of like the one that they were actually hired to play like a party or an event that they were actually picked by John's organization to do that. It's tribute bands. You wonder what some people think about them. I don't know what John thinks about a lot of these bands. It's
well, I've heard him say he likes them. Like he appreciates that we're we're trying to do their music right and all that stuff. But he could be just saying that.
He's diplomatic. I mean, it's funny. He doesn't want to go into politics, but it's very clear with all the people he associates with that he could go into politics.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a certain point for all these artists that the ride is going to end. Mm-hmm. John can keep going on and doing other stuff. He can play different types of music. And, obviously before they did the new album, he was doing a lot of solo gigs, raising money for charity. And clearly they didn't know what was really going on. And it's interesting how they booked this tour because they didn't book the entire U.S. tour at once. No. They did some dates. And I think they wanted to see what the reception was before they decided to go out, the rest of them. And they're doing 2 dates at Madison Square Garden, so clearly the response has been good.
Right.
Although that's still not the same as playing in Jersey, like the Meadowlands, which is like.
Well, I was wondering that. I was wondering
50,000 as opposed to 15,000 a night.
Yeah, I was wondering if they were. I think this tour ends in April, right?
Yeah, it's soon. It's like mid-April.
Yeah, I was wondering if they're gonna do they usually would do the summer, the sheds in the summertime. I wonder if they're gonna do that. Or if they just
they might do Europe and then come back. They've oftentimes done that where they split it up and then they come back and they always close it in Jersey. Mm-hmm. I think Giant Stadium actually. They like that. That's really lately the place. And it seems like, but that's a ton of people. That's more than 2 nights at MSG.
Yeah,
that's still impressive that they're playing those crowds.
Oh yeah. I mean, they do well at Gillette here in New England. Every time because I guess the Patriots are his second team. After the Giants,
yes, they always trying to buy into that.
But yeah, they do pretty well. So
I don't know. I kind of feel like what?
No, I was just gonna say that I know that the Mohegan show sold out in like 15 minutes.
Yeah, I was talking about that with Eddie Trunk when I was interviewing him for the book. The idea that he was surprised at the number of people that were not going to jump ship because Richie left. My argument, though, is that I'll bet you there's still not going to be. It's still going to be big, but it's not going to be the level of 2013 big when they were literally the biggest tour in the world.
Right.
And that tour grossed $260 million. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. One of the interesting things about Bon Jovi, I feel like there's a bit of that Rodney Dangerfield aspect where it's just like people just some people will always view them as that 80s band, and those are like, I think Keep the Faith is still the best Bon Jovi record, and that's 92. I think it's phenomenal. It's like, I love songs like Fear that are gritty. He starts to bring in the social issues, but he's also really, in his voice, you almost feel like he's going to blow it out, because it's a heavy album.
Yeah.
And it's great. And that it was, and as much as Slippery When Wet is considered this 80s masterpiece, New Jersey's a better record.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, Slippery When Wet, half of Slippery When Wet is kind of filler to me.
Yeah. New Jersey just had hit after hit on that album.
I mean, Social Disease it's a terrible song. Like, I every time that comes on, I skip.
Yeah.
I can't stand it. And yet, I love Wild in the Streets and stuff like that. But then New Jersey was a longer album, but it had more diversity. Mm-hmm. And obviously, back when they did the Circle tour, they were, Homebound Train and stuff like that. They were bringing stuff out, and they were kind of going back. They were bringing back some of the heavier stuff from then. But Keep the Faith is a really underrated album.
Yeah. And
it seems, they've gotten a little more inconsistent since they had the big revival, but like Have a Nice Day is a really good album. Another thing that I think, when going back to what I was saying about thinking of that album, going back to what I was saying about doing the book, is that, David Bryan has co-written a number of songs, not that many, but all the ones that he does are great.
Yeah. And
there's at least one of those in Have a Nice Day. I think it was the last Cigarette. I think so. And, there's something about, I don't know. There's something about the fact that you have these other members that I don't think are being quote unquote exploited the way they should be. But that's part of the reason that David Bryan went off and did Broadway.
Memphis,
honestly, because he has ideas. And, when I interviewed him back in 2010 after I met him at a party from Memphis, he talked to me about the fact that in the mid-90s he started getting into songwriting, and he got this manager who wanted to sell songs, and they sold, Clive Davis loved a song he wrote that Curtis Stigers got a top 40 hit with, but then it just kind of went away. He didn't really end up selling other songs, and so the Broadway thing just sort of happened. Mm-hmm. First it was off Broadway with Toxic Avenger, but actually, Memphis was in the works for ages.
Right.
A long time, years and years and years. And they have another song called Chasing the Song, he and Joe DiPietro, that should be, hopefully it'll come out.
I heard about that, but I don't see it anywhere.
Musicals take a long time. They spent a lot of time working on Memphis. And I think part of the problem with Memphis is that it was a louder show. I think he had to convince people that, yes, this is supposed to be loud and full, and it's not your typical musical, but it's about it's about Birth of Rock and Roll. This is not about it's not a standard just song and dance thing. And I think they had a bit of tension. He also, I think it was like those Sweet Valley High books. I think he got involved in something that was like a musical production of that, and that just didn't happen. And once again, trying to convince people it's okay to do this. And it's only like in the last 10 years or so that you've really seen the rock jukebox musical become in vogue.
Right.
I remember when I saw Tarzan, the Disney thing on Broadway, it was loud. It was like a rock concert loud. Yeah. I'm like, are you kidding me? There's kids here. But it was Phil Collins. He likes his drums loud, and that's what you're going to get. Well, so hopefully, maybe someday we'll see. I know one of the cast members of Rent was working on an Operation Mindcrime musical, Queen's Right thing.
Cool. Well, it's like Rock of Ages, that whole thing was.
But it was all other people's music. But I think with Rock of Ages, I saw it like 3 times. I managed to get tickets a couple times for free because I'm pressed. And I went opening night, and it was fun. But it was really not even a hard rock musical. It was sort of. It was a pop. It was a pop version of that. Mm-hmm. They quoted "Eat Me Alive" by Judas Priest. Like the woman said it, but they didn't perform it. There's a little Quiet Riot in there, and Twisted Sister sort of borderline because they were a hard rock band that had like a metal attitude.
Yeah, it was more. You had what was it? Quarter Flash. Was it Quarter? Yeah, and not Quarter Flash.
They had Journey. They had Foreigner.
Didn't they
have Benatar, I think.
Heart in My Heart in there?
Unless they added it in later.
I know it's on the. I think it's on the soundtrack.
It's interesting. It just wasn't. It was a fun show.
Yeah, I saw it twice. I liked it better than the movie. I can tell you that.
Oh, the movie! I saw part of the movie and I was like, "Wow, this is." They should have made it. I like a lot of Tom Cruise stuff, but that was not. Was not the right choice. That was bad, and that was an interesting night too. Joe Lynn Turner was there. J.J. French was there, and then they had I didn't realize the singer of Survivor played the after party.
Jimmy James.
The original singer of Survivor, and I like the original singer of Survivor, but And this guy comes by. He had performed Eye of the Tiger and some other stuff. I'm like, oh, that's cool. But it's this guy with gray hair, top hat, this huge beard, looks nothing like the original singer-survivor. A friend of mine asked me to take a photo with him. Like, sure. He walks off. I'm like, oh, that was a singer-survivor. Like, are you kidding me? Like, it looks nothing like the singer-survivor because all the hair. And I was kind of bummed out. I was like, oh, I could have got a photo. But it was a fun show, and it was very 80s. But I used to get in trouble saying that show was kept going by middle-aged rocker chicks because it was all the gals that wanted to relive the craziness of those days and the stupid boys they dated that some of them still want to date now, but I don't know why. And it was fun, but LA was a different scene. Like I was really into the heavy stuff. That's why I didn't get into Bon Jovi until later. I was a thrash metal guy.
Yeah.
I was Judas Priest when I got into Celtic Frost and Anthrax and Slayer and Living Death and all these groups that like some people remember, some people don't. It's early Metallica stuff where anybody knew who they were. Yep. So Bon Jovi was sort of like, those bands were kind of the enemy. I got into some of the Sunset Strip stuff, but after a while I'm like, this is ridiculous. And maybe I was just one of those guys, even though I wish I could find like the metal gals that were really into the heavy stuff. Like you just didn't like, I remember going to see the Defenders of the Faith tour. So all of us in ninth grade come in with like, the Metallian t-shirts. Then a month later, all the girls come in with the Def Leppard t-shirts. I'm like, F you. And, that's why I got Alex Skolnick from Testament to put the quote in there where he talks about how, there were certain people in that thrash scene and then we invented bands like Bon Jovi because it was slick. It was co-opting what they were doing. It wasn't metal, but the press was calling it metal or they're calling it pop metal. And you were just like, I don't even remember when the hair band tag actually came along. Some people said it was the 80s. I feel like it was a little bit later.
After it wasn't
really
early
quite
90s.
then. I think people's memories are all off. But he made a point but he did make the point that quote in the book, the one quote I have from him, where he does say, it was that acoustic performance they did on MTV in '89, the Wanted Dead or Alive and Living on a Prayer, like the fact that they did those songs acoustically. Mm-hmm. He said, there's some grit there beneath the glitter. It wasn't just this kind of studio creation. And he said, we didn't all run out and buy Bon Jovi records the next day, but like we had a lot more respect for them.
Yeah.
That's
why I think they could play.
Yeah, well, I think, and also that's why Keep the Faith was an important record for me. It didn't sell as much as it was still a double platinum album,
right? And
it was a reinvention, but I'm glad they did it. They needed to kind of do that. Some people argue that they changed much. Like there's you can really, even when you go from Crush to Bounce, big difference.
Yeah,
Bounce is one of their heaviest records. In a way, the guitar sound's probably the heaviest guitar sound.
He started doing drop D tuning and using like Mesa amplifiers instead of the old Marshall stuff or whatever he was using.
There's that, and I also what was interesting though is they were trying to keep up with the times. There's almost no guitar solos in that record.
No.
They're like, Richie, where are you? What happened?
It probably that might have been the start of where he started to start thinking about I want to play more. Because all the interviews, last 3 or 4 years that I've read is that him and Orianthi they just want to play, they just want to jam and nothing. They don't want to worry about this big machine going. They just want to get up and play, in the old days.
Well, that's what it was. And you hear Richie's solo stuff is vastly different than John's.
Oh, yes, yeah.
His first solo album is great.
Yep.
It's not quite as quick. It's more mellow to me. The last one was really good.
Yeah, Aftermath. Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually, that's a really good album. And I heard the new one's really, actually I heard he recorded like 2 albums worth of material for the new one. I've become friends with Bruce Stephen Foster, who's the guy that gave him his first break basically, and they're still friends. And I think Richie, Richie just wants to go out and he just wants to be Richie. Bruce made the comment that's near the end of the book where he's like, he was basically in a corporation for 30 years.
Right. And
as a lot of us know, but there are still plenty of fans who don't know, John's the one with the name on the contract. Yeah. They are all hired guns.
Yeah.
And after listening to, I don't know, there was just not the new album, but just.
What About Now?
Yeah, well, yeah, because Burning Bridges was not an official, an official album.
They took him off that.
Yeah. There's one song that he co-wrote on that too. But the best song on the thing.
They re-recorded it. I guess John Shanks re-recorded his part.
Yeah, it was interesting. What About Now? The problem with that album is it's very pop. Mm-hmm. Because we can. It's just such a pop tune. And you're watching them do like it's either American Idol or X Factor in England at the time, and I'm sitting there, Richie's going da na 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 na. I can't sing. Like you're just like, wow, really?
Yeah.
Like these straight eighth notes, and Richie must be like, oh my god, what am I doing here? And but I want to hear this new stuff. It's been forever. Like they've been working on it. Bob Rock produced it. Like
Yep.
I'm hoping it's gonna, and I think he's waiting until this tour cycle with Bon Jovi is done.
Well, I heard July is when it's actually coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And it's like 14, 15 songs, but then I heard there's like at least 2 albums worth of material, which wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I got to imagine playing second fiddle to John after a while could be a little frustrating, since that they seem to. There's certain times you watch a lot of the footage from the Circle tour, they very clearly, are in sync, and he lets him. I think on Homebound Train, he lets him go off and sing solo, sing lead, and lets Richie do his thing. And there's a couple songs in there from the New Jersey period, I think, that they let Richie take the lead vocal on.
He would do "I'll Be There for You." And I don't know if he did "Lay Your Hands on Me" with Bon Jovi, but I know he does it by himself. But did he?
Yeah, it was for those 1 or 2 New Jersey tunes too. There was, but there's also that and the guitar organ kind of trade off in Homebound Train, but like also then Bobby Bandieri also gets involved, so sort of like 2 guitars, and David Bryan, he gets to solo. It's like, it's funny, when I interviewed Luke Eben, who produced Crush and Bounce, he told me that on Bounce, like, if he asked me, he said, have you ever gotten a solo? He's like, no, I don't think so. And so they give him like. It's like it's like a 4-bar. It's like 4 measures, I think, literally. But they forgot Homebound Train. Like, that's like the big. That was like a huge solo. That was harmonica though, and organ back on the album. And once again, I just think I think David Bryan's underutilized. But I'm glad he did Memphis, and I wish he did a couple solo releases too that were nice. They were more solo kind of piano releases, so it's a little different. He did a couple soundtracks with Larry Fast. That was the fun part about this book, is finding out what else they've worked on and who else they've worked with. And I didn't realize that Larry Fast had been brought into Richie's first solo album to make David sound a little less Bon Jovi.
Yeah, it's I like I said, I just got the book 2 days ago, and I'm just started reading it, and I've already learned, a bunch of stuff that I didn't already know.
Well, it's good.
Yeah, definitely, and it's interesting. It's nice to see. Like, first of all, like you said, there's a lot of other books out there that go through Bon Jovi's history, but this one, it just seems to go into more detail with the other people on the outside.
Yeah.
And their perspective of how this thing went and how it started, and how John was so driven to be a rock star.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's a cool read.
He was driven from day one, but I think once again, he still has, as you and I both know, there's all these people around him, and also it's like Desmond Child is incredibly important in terms of songwriting. Wayne Isham with his videos. The thing that gets me is that you watch the behind the music on Bon Jovi, and then you watch the Biography Channel special, and you see him interviewed. Like, he takes credit for Runaway, for example. Like, he didn't write Runaway. He wrote a couple lyrics, but even the songwriter for Runaway. I mean, he even said that to me. He's like, this is a song I already had, And then it's funny. I mean, it was. I'm just looking through it again. Like, it's just. It was. They try to track down all these pictures too, which I think is really, really important. I mean, this Joanna DeVries was my editor. She was great. Sally Claxton, the photo editor. I mean, she really pulled out a lot of stuff.
That's who contacted me. Sally Claxton.
That's who I figured would have contacted you.
Yeah.
And it's so funny now. I gotta do everything with glasses these days. It's like, no, what happened to my eyes? And George Carrick was interesting. He has a cool photo of. Let's see if I can do this the right way. I don't know if I can.
Just so people know, this podcast the video will be on YouTube. You'll be able to see what he's showing.
Yeah, it's a shot of George Carrick, who is the guy that wrote Runaway.
And it's funny, I remember seeing John. You see Scandal up there too. I remember seeing John in those 2 videos.
Yeah, it's funny, and I didn't know that before either, because I didn't realize there was that early version. It's that Love's Got a Line on You. And then there's another one. That you. I think that was one of the Scandal. There's 2 different Scandal.
Yeah, Goodbye to You. Goodbye to You.
Goodbye to You.
Well, I remember seeing it, back years ago, and I had to do a double take. I'm like, what the hell? That looks like Jon Bon Jovi in that video. And then I'm looking, and I'm like, that is Jon Bon Jovi. And I did a little digging and found out that he just, like you had written in the book, he just was there, and they needed another guitar player, basically.
Yeah, there were 2 versions of Goodbye to You, and he's goofing off, and I think I don't know why. I tried reaching out to Patty, but I didn't hear anything. Like, I think I'll just reach out to the guitarist of Scandal. I don't think I have a feeling he was just sitting in.
Yeah.
for somebody. I think people think he was in Scandal and he wasn't. But there was, it's like I grew up outside of Boston. There's sort of an incestuous thing that happens in a lot of these communities where, like, this person goes to this band, this goes to this band, and there's also people who think that Bon Jovi is a prefab band. And that's true to a certain extent, but Tico and Alec had been gigging in Jersey for probably, I think, a better part of a decade.
Yeah.
Tico probably longer. And they already had the experience. I mean, Tico was a little dubious at first because he's the oldest member of the band by several years. He's kind of looking at this kid like, I don't know. Does he really know what he's doing? And Richie had been playing out. What was interesting to learn is that, Bruce Stephen Foster, even though he gave Richie his first opportunity because basically his bassist got sick and got food poisoning, so Richie went up there and fumbled on bass, which didn't work. But he brought him back the next week, and I love the quote that he says that, I decided, all right, we're doing Kansas City. I'm going to give Richie the chance to solo. He's like, and Richie, I thought he was going to do Hot Dog and do this whole crazy noodling. He's like, yeah. He's like, he gets up there and he plays this one note with such precision and eloquence, like Yo-Yo Ma playing the cello. I looked at him before the second note and said, "You're hired. You're in the band." And that's the same that happened with Richie at the audition with John. He convinced John to audition with the band. John got there late. He's already jamming with him, and John's like, "Yeah, okay, you're in the band."
It just fit.
And poor Snake Sabo, Dave. Dave Sabo, he's out.
He did okay after that.
He did. There were some monetary issues. I think that came play with that production deal, but I was mentioning all these bands that Richie was into. Bruce hit. Richie was just doing all this stuff, and I don't think people could keep up. I think he had 2, 3, 4 different projects going on at the same time. It seems like he had solo shows he did as Rich Sambora, but yet, funnily enough, he and John, I don't think they really crossed paths very much because I think they kind of played in different circles. The other thing too that I think is really important to note, and this is something, John had a connection to Power Station, which is now Avatar Studios in New York City, and Avatar hopefully is still going to stay around. There's always been rumors about whether it's going to close, and even if I don't know how close he was with Tony, but clearly, there was a strong connection there. I think Tony was instrumental in helping break him, and they had a lawsuit years later when Tony released all these demos, and John said, "Well, you can't do that." And Tony's like, "I gave you all this studio time that would have cost you a lot more money if you didn't know me." And another instrumental person. Bruce Stephen Foster was very instrumental with the Richie stuff. He got me to chat. I got to chat with Tommy Marolda for a few minutes, so I got a couple quotes from him. Ponte, who was John's bandmate in The Rest, which is the band after Atlantic City Expressway. They were together about most of 1980. And Jack went on to be a hard rock songwriter, and then he ended up managing people like India RE and Scarface, and then having his own production company in the last decade. But Jack, he referred me to Billy Pontiac, and it was Bill Frank, but Billy Pontiac and Will Hersick, who were early Atlantic City Expressway bandmates. And Laura Giantonio, who was like DJ and photographer at the Fast Lane. So, Jack was really important too, and Jack had some funny stories, and you can't print everything in the book. Because Elephant Book Company, with the British company that hired me, they got the deal with Sterling in America, which is why it's in every Barnes & Noble, because Sterling is owned by Barnes & Noble, which helps.
Yeah.
Also means you won't be jumping in the discount bin anytime soon. But I go into stores, and there's one store out in Long Island. They had 1 copy before Christmas. Now they have 3. So I guess somebody's buying it, which is good. But, all these people, they were great little anecdotes. But, even back then, the story that I didn't put in the book, where I think Jack had gone to the studio with John, and I think they'd overheard Tony wanted to just get all these other people around John and not bother with everybody else. And Jack said, John's credit, John's like, all right, we're getting out of here. And they just left for the day. Like he didn't want to indulge, John. As much as John, there's some people who I think on the business side of things in the business have some issues with him. It depends on who you talk to. John's always been good to his bandmates.
Yeah.
So I think it was Bill Frank was telling me that John got him I think on audition with Scandal and Billy Squier. Like he got him a couple auditions, and while they didn't pan out, he appreciated the fact that John actually did it for him. It's in here somewhere. It's like I got to reread this book myself because there's just so much stuff in here, man.
Yeah, it's cool though because there's a lot of information, but the pictures are great in this book.
Well, that's a big selling point.
Yeah, and full color. I definitely.
It's both Scandal and Billy Squier, and also actually, it's right. The Scandal videos, Love's Got a Line on You and Goodbye to You, and it's funny how a lot of stuff you remember, but then there's a lot of stuff you go through and I had 4 months to put this together. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that I already knew, and there's a lot of stuff I was like, wow, my poor editor, because I had to get a rough draft. I had to get assigned mid-December. I signed the contract, and by the beginning of February, I had to have a 50,000 word rough draft. And normally a book's 100,000 words, but because we have 150 some images in here, you obviously cut down the space for that. So that made it even harder.
Right. Yeah.
I'm cramming 40 years of history into 50,000 words, which is, you're averaging about a little over 1,000 words per year, which is not a lot. So now, of course, I just lost my train of thought about what I was. So I think it's about just all the information that I was cramming in there. And so yeah, it was due beginning of February. I got in by mid to late February. And then as they came, and Sterling only had like 4 notes. I was a little shocked. Like, they seemed very happy with it. But then as they were laying it out, I just kept finding more and more stuff and adding more stuff in. And then, like, I think I got Mike Kruger from Nickelback 3 weeks before we locked the design. And I think the last thing I put in the book is Richie sort of grew up sort of by a swamp near like an industrial power plant. But I think there's something different I had in there for some reason. And it didn't seem right. And I checked a couple of Desmond Child quotes, and of course, Bruce corroborated it later on. I was like, oh yeah, we literally were putting stuff into the last 5 minutes before and the poor designer was pissed, like, really, you're doing this to me? But I think it came out well.
Yeah, it's like I said, I definitely people should go get it if you're a fan of Bon Jovi. I mean, everything is in here. And
it's a lot. I think there's some people, who wanted the dirt, and it's gotten a lot of good reviews.
Classic Rock, you're never going to get that. You're not going to get that.
Classic Rock was mixed on it, but the guy, even then, despite the fact he was disappointed that I didn't crack that wall, he said, well, this is probably the most comprehensive Bon Jovi biography you saw. I'm like, yeah, it's like Bon Jovi's. I think he's got loyal fans, but I don't know. I think with even any band, you have loyal fans and you have real hardcore fans. I suspect that majority of Bon Jovi fans don't know half the stuff in this book because I don't think they really read that many interviews. And when he goes on Oprah, he's not talking about this stuff. No, the first 2 chapters in here alone with all the quotes from Jack and Bill and Will and Laura and Bruce and Tommy, like, there's a lot of stuff in there that isn't talked about. And it at least clarifies a lot of things that you read on Wikipedia or you read in, Laura Jackson did a book a number of years ago. And I remember John actually got upset when it got released because all she really did is she went on YouTube and she found out, I found them later, a lot of obscure interviews. And was able and made some and kind of theorized about some things, and it's really not so controversial, she did the best she could, the circumstances. But what was funny, but it focuses on John. What was interesting is he allegedly, I heard that he actually got upset about it and mentioned on the website when it got an American release because it's a British book. Said, don't read this is unauthorized. I'm like, I wonder if he's going to do that with this book, and he didn't. I'm like, maybe it would have been better if he did, because then more people would buy it. And maybe he figured that out. Like, yeah, maybe I really shouldn't say anything about any of these books, because people will just go out and buy them.
Yeah.
Richie Bozette, like the former tour manager, Rich Bozette, like he had it was Sex, Drugs, and Bon Jovi. He had like his book, and he had the shocking photo of John in bed with 4 half-naked women. And by the time those photos ran in the Post, it was like no one cared. They're like, it's the 80s. He wasn't dating Dorothy at that point. They had broken up for like that year. And that's not really shocking. What would be shocking is to find out just business shenanigans or things that maybe not make certain people not seem so nice. You discover, are addictions shocking? Tico talked about that and dealing with alcohol and Richie too, in When We Were Beautiful. But is that really shocking? It's rock and roll. Right. There's probably some things. Everyone's got skeletons in their closet, but I don't think the fans care that much.
Not at this point. No.
They're not going to care.
No.
Women love him, and it's just. I just hope Richie comes. As I'm sure like you're hoping Richie will put out a great album.
Yeah,
and you can start covering it.
I can't sing like him. Let me tell you that. I'll tell you that right now. But I just hope that eventually they get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he. Yeah. They. I don't right at this point. I don't really think he's going back at any point. He seems happy. I would like to see them, play again, whether it's just a one-time thing or.
You know how it works. It'll happen.
Even never say never. Yeah, never say never. With Sammy. But yeah, they gotta have Michael in there too. But I just hope it. When John finally decides, all right, this is the last tour, get Richie back and just do it right.
Well, what's for you being in the tribute band? What's the most challenging thing for you? What's the most challenging aspect of being Richie Sambora?
Trying to sing like him. The singing is he's like still to this day his voice is crazy good. John is singing for the 30-40 years. His voice is kind of not shot, but you can hear him struggling when he's singing nowadays.
Well, a lot of these guys don't have training. I don't know if any of them got training. But Richie's got more of a soulful voice, and
Yeah.
he doesn't. A lot of the stuff that John did, like the stuff that I loved in the late '80s, early '90s, even stuff like "Have a Nice Day" and things like that, it's very gritty.
Hmm.
But if you don't have you don't use proper vocal technique, or you didn't really learn that early on, it's going to affect you later. Even now, I contributed to a story Billboard did a little over almost a year and a half ago. It was about singers having problems with their throat,
Hmm.
and needing to deal with voice lessons and having to recuperate. And they were talking about like Adele and Sam Smith. I'm like, really? Adele and Sam Smith? Like Sam Smith's a crooner, and Adele, a strong voice, not screaming. She's not. She's hitting high notes, but
Hmm.
I mean, I heard that about Celine. I heard that from someone yesterday about Celine Dion. Like certain people, if they don't get the vocal training, or there's just certain things they're not doing properly. Even if you're just singing something normally, if you do enough concerts over time, you're going to damage your voice.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that rock singers like John were doing back then, or a lot of the metal guys that we know. I mean, even look at people like Corey Taylor from Slipknot today, Danny Worsnot from Asking Alexandria, who isn't. I know why. I can tell why he left the band. I mean, the next album he wasn't doing any of that crazy stuff because he was blowing out his voice.
Yeah.
And if you're blowing out your voice at that age, like when you're around 30, that's not going to be good when you're 50.
No.
John hasn't hit the high notes in Prayer in a long time, but the funny thing about that is that's the only thing I think he's fudging in concert. He lets the audience do it and no one cares.
Yeah.
Because the audience wants to sing that song. So that's fine. If he was doing that, like, it's like the Vince Neil thing, just put the mic out, like every other line.
Yeah, every line.
Say the audience,
I
like,
know.
that's lazy.
Well, it's funny.
Really
It's funny you say that.
singing through the whole show.
It's funny.
John's not doing
it. Yeah. I was gonna say it's funny you say that we're living on a prayer because that song is to the point when we play it, sometimes we don't have to sing the chorus. We still do. Like if there's video up from the show that we just did at Mohegan and of Living on a Prayer, and when it gets to that chorus, we're singing, but you can't hear us.
Yeah.
You just hear the crowd. It makes it a little easier on us.
I guess it's one of those songs that's just always going to have that effect. I think that's great. Getting props to Desmond Child. I mean, I think that's really Desmond's song. If you go on YouTube, you'll find a piano and vocal rendition of that song. It doesn't say when it's from, but it's this melancholy ballad, and I have a feeling it probably was. And he goes to John and Richie, and they rock it up. But I think Richie is really the one that rocked it up, and I think that guitar solo is all him. Any other guitar flourishes and any other chord changes, which are pretty minimal, I think, to the song, are Richie. I think John just contributed Once Upon a Time Not So Long Ago. I think that because I don't know what else he would add in because the vocal melody was already. I mean, it's fine. It's just that's where the vocal melody was already there.
Right.
And there's a lot of songs that John's written on it. I mean, like a song like Fear off of Keep the Faith. That's John wrote that. I mean, Dry County. I mean, those are his songs. He's written some cool tunes. But I remember when I think it was Dan Jacobs from Atreyu. Dan from Atreyu. I interviewed him, and he's younger, and he's like, he's thinking about all the stuff that John did, and I noticed that with a lot of fans that they really. I mean, John drives the engine, but I think there are a lot of people who really do think that John is just responsible for all this stuff. And it's not like I'm trying to put him down, but I think, you got to give credit to other people. You've got a talented band behind you.
Well, the story I heard with Living on a Prayer was that John didn't even want it on the album.
No.
Richie said, well, you're crazy.
He and Desmond had to beg him, basically, put it on. And that's the song that made their career.
Yeah.
But this is the thing, and this is what you learn in this business. I've learned it. It's hit or miss. You can have. I mean, look at the band Hinder. Their first album was okay, but that second album, Take It to the Limit, that's a great album. I mean, that's like a classic kind of throwback to like the '80s Sunset Strip stuff. It's got some attitude. It's still kind of modern sounding, but retro. And Lips of an Angel was like the big hit single off of Extreme Behavior, off their first album, right?
Yep.
And that album is not so great to me. I wrote their bio for their second and third album, so I got to chat with them. I remember I hung out with them on the tour bus when they were writing the bio for the second album. It was before the second record came out. And they had that Use Me was the first song off the second album, and it's a great anthem, and I think that's some Playboy Bunnies in the video, and it was this whole party thing. And the drummer told me, Cody just told me that they just literally the label didn't know what to do because it wasn't taking off quite the way they wanted it to. So they immediately jump into another ballad, and that probably kind of hurt that album because you don't want them to be a ballad band, not when they're talking about partying and living like rock stars in the 80s. You don't really want that all of a sudden. Like the label didn't seem to have enough belief in it. And that seems to have happened to a lot of bands. Bon Jovi's been very fortunate that the label stuck with them. A band like Bon Jovi wouldn't happen today.
No.
Because if you're not a huge hit by even your second album, you're effed.
You're gone, yeah.
And they actually, the first album did well. The second album sold more, but for some reason, even Eddie Trunk was telling me the album wasn't taking it off. Taking off. Wasn't taking off in America the way it should have. It sold like 750,000 copies at the time, and it grew later. Mm-hmm. But they were having a hard time selling that record, and they needed to hit singles. And once again, "Runaway" was the best song on the first two albums, and that was a George Carrick song. So they needed the outside songwriter of some people. And that's probably what's kept them from the Rock Hall of Fame, is that people want rockers to write their own stuff completely. And yet, there's nothing wrong with outside songwriters.
No.
I know Billy Falcon's been involved with him for the past 15 years. He tried to promote Billy Falcon on his short-lived label. Back in '91, and it didn't happen. But I think that's part of the issue. Glenn Gamboa from Newsday, I interviewed for this. He's a pop music critic at Newsday. He was saying that. I think it's true. It's like people want you to write your stuff, and if you're not writing your stuff, there's something wrong. It's not authentic.
Well, it's funny.
But pop, it's all other people.
Well, they're in the Songwriters Hall of Fame.
Well,
that's
almost 10 years ago. It's 8 years ago now.
And Eddie Trunk's on his crusade, with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He can't stand them because they bypass all these bands. They're just starting to put in now. What is it? Tomorrow night or this weekend? Journey's
finally getting in.
Yeah.
And Journey's another one of those bands that, they get a lot of flack too, even though actually they did write their own songs. Mm-hmm. But I think part of it is that that's sort of two different bands. I actually really love a lot of the stuff they've done since Steve Perry left. I think that they're just stuff with Arnell. The last two or three albums have been great. Mm-hmm. They've actually been really good because Neil Schon is a hard rock guy, and that's what he's supposed to do. Now, I know Kevin Shirley, a producer who's worked with them, and he made the comment that Neil really wanted to be Eddie Van Halen. He wanted to have that kind of band, and Journey wasn't taking off as a prog band. Mm-hmm. So they brought Steve Perry in, and that created some tension, and it created a dichotomy in the band where you had those soulful ballads and you had these really intense rock tunes, and you had Separate Ways, which is sort of in the middle. It's something Steve Perry could do and it would rock enough that it's a big anthem. I guess the Rock Hall, Priest should be in there, Maiden should be in there, a lot of metal bands should be in there. They'll pick the obvious people, but without bands like Priest, you don't have, or Motorhead, you don't have speed metal. Mm-hmm. You don't have a lot of the stuff that happens in the 80s. You don't have this image that then and musical ideas. And I think it's interesting. We should talk about. How much do we think Bon Jovi's actually influenced bands since then? I don't know how many. Actually, at the time they did, I think that latter half of the 80s, that second wave of hair bands, that was Bon Jovi Bon Jovi and a bit of Whitesnake, who were kind of following in a way in Bon Jovi's footsteps. So they were kind of recording around that time anyway. Right. But then I don't know in modern times if you have bands that are kind of like that now, because the only way you can do that shtick now is if you're Steel Panther and you're doing it tongue in cheek and you're doing it with a sense of irony. Even though I've met the singer of Steel Panther when they were called Metal School about 20 years ago, and it's very clear he wants to live that lifestyle and he likes that thing. And this is about the closest you're going to get to it, because he was in Atomic Punks, the Van Halen tribute.
Oh, in LA,
And so he really likes that, but you can't really get away. NFL Brides have the image, but it's not quite the same thing. And people mention that Avenged Sevenfold had a little bit of that image at the beginning, and they had some of that vibe. But Avenged Sevenfold really went on much more on metal, even proggy later on. So I don't know. Are there any bands now besides Steel Panther that are really doing that thing earnestly? I think Steel Panther is sort of earnest because Russ Parrish is a great guitarist, but Satchel.
He's Satchel. Well, the band I keep hearing nowadays, and I don't know if they're in that that category, but the Pretty Reckless.
Yeah.
They seem to be getting into that area where they're just about to break.
Yeah. Be interesting if that happens, because I think we kind of, the 80s are surviving. The 90s revival's not happening the way I thought it would. It's EDM. Grunge is sort of there, but it's like the progenitors of grunge. The big bands are coming back. You can't have a Nirvana reunion. Smashing Pumpkins just doesn't seem to happen. A terrible band.
Well, to me, it's like the
it's
90s,
weird.
The 90s stuff, to me, it's just like nowadays there's so many depressing things going on in this world. I don't want to listen to that stuff. I've had you turn on the news and there's doom and gloom. You look here, you listen to I don't want that in my music. So that's where I stand. I'd rather listen to uplifting. That's why I'm still doing a Bon Jovi tribute, because it's fun. I just want it. There's too much going on in the world that I need to be worrying about that kind of stuff.
Well, but the thing with the 80s, I mean, the Reagan era had a lot of turmoil. I mean, we had the Cold War, we had nuclear war looming over us. I mean, people were concerned and people were nervous. And so that was a reaction to that. But you did have a lot of socially conscious rock and pop in the 80s also. And you had the whole Live Aid thing and Hearing Aid that Dio put together. But by the same token, the 90s stuff to me was kind of whiny.
Yeah.
I mean, it was almost
complaining
like
about everything.
Alternative bands, talk about it. They didn't go to their prom, or like they had these minor issues that to me really didn't feel serious. Now, some people did take on it. Tori Amos was great. I think Sarah McLachlan. There were certain people that really, and like Alanis to me, I don't think Alanis Morissette. I liked her later stuff. I thought I didn't like Jagged Little Pill. It's really not a great album. I don't think it holds up.
It got overplayed too.
It got overplayed, and it's more about the production. It's about the attitude, and she did make it acceptable for young women to go up there and scream about whatever turmoil they were going through. It made it much more acceptable. Tori Amos did it in a more refined way. It was still edgy, but Tori Amos was really going deep, but she was dealing with some deep stuff in there. It was Alanis had this bad relationship, and I'm sure there's other stuff that happened, but the stuff that Alanis dealt with that was serious on later albums it was more nuanced, and it seemed to work better. But she did bring that angry young rock chick thing out, which was good. At a mainstream level, there were people doing that before, underground, but she was like Galassin, which is a totally different kind of a thing, but, she was raging in a different way, but like with Plague Mass and stuff like that. But yeah, the 90s, a lot of the mainstream 90s stuff is like, remember that Marcy Playground, Sex and Candy? It was songs like that it was like, really? Does anybody care now? I never got it. And people didn't want to be rock stars. You had a few people like Scott Weiland who wanted to be rock stars. Everyone else, no one cared.
Yeah, it was all about, oh, my life sucks, this and that, but I'm making millions of dollars.
Yeah, boo-hoo.
Well, you don't want the money, give it to me, I'll take it.
Well, I asked Chester Bennington that a few years ago. I said, you guys have obviously gotten to the top of the charts. You play huge venues around the world, how easy is it to stay in touch with the angry young man inside? Because he's talked about a lot of serious stuff, like, abuse growing up and things like that. And he said, well, after my first wife, we got divorced my first wife, and she, got a lot of money in the settlement and certain things happened. He was like, do people I did, and then that still gives us something to be angry about, I guess. I don't know. I feel like the 80s were an interesting time. People criticized it. I think the first half of the 80s actually had some of the best rock and pop stuff that was ever done. The latter half of the 80s, honestly, not so much. I feel like that's when all the digital drums came in. There was a lot of studio glass. Even when Rush did Hold Your Fire, it was like, Alex Lifeson's guitars, they sounded like glass. Like, it was weird. It didn't sound right. So and unfortunately, I think that's the stuff now that's influencing all these pop singers. It is that cheesy 80s vibe. And I'm kind of over it. I'm over all these pop divas that are all trying to be Madonna. At least Gaga did the album with Tony Bennett, and I'll give her props for doing the Metallica thing. She was tweeting once about eating a burger at a place, and they had a burger named after a Saxon song or whatever. And I'm like, all right, that's cool. Like, Kesha went on stage with Alice Cooper at one point. But I'm tired of all this. It's too fake now. It's Pro Tools, it's auto-tune. It's like, get back to playing and being real. And there are young musicians out there that are doing that and want to do that. They just can't do it in the same way anymore.
You're right.
What
was I going to say? This is cool because we're going into this and that, and we're not just we're here to talk. We're here to talk about your book.
Buy the book. Buy many copies.
Buy the book. Yeah, that's the main thing.
Well, you could look. You should show pictures. This has got a lot of pictures in here. I love these. This was Joanna's idea too, is because you have the borders. A lot of them have blue borders on the side, but stuff like this. Yeah. The 4-page spread, 4-photo spread over 2 pages.
Well, it's cool because it's not repetitive.
Well, I'll tell you something. That was partially me too. They got a lot of great photos, but there was a certain point where I was, you had only had a certain budget for this book, both for writing and with photo. And with photo budget, then that cuts down on the writing budget, but also you only photos you could buy. Like Eddie Maluk, a photographer friend of mine, he provided them with a lot of photos, and he worked with us, which was great. I think we have a Niels Lozauer shot in there, but Eddie also had a lot of stuff, and they got stuff off of Shutterstock. But I wanted some of the the lesser known photos. I think one of Ed's photos in there is from the Madison Square Garden gig they did opening up for ZZ Top, I believe.
Yeah, I saw it.
And that's actually that's one of the early double page shots in here.
Yeah, it's John and Richie, and then there was another one of just John. If I remember correctly.
Yeah, this is page. I'm gonna double check. I'm pretty sure that photo on page 32 is is Ed's, and 32. Actually, let me see. Got to make sure you get this right. See, I mean, even all the photo credits in the back of the book, man, it's crazy what I'm looking through in here.
Yeah, 32, 33 is John and Richie, Madison Square Garden.
That's Eddie Maluk. And that's and that photo. I'll show it now that we've been talking about it. People think, well, why are you not showing us anything?
You got to buy the book, then you can see them all.
Exactly. Well, you can see it without seeing with all the reflections here in my. That's like a great early shot.
Yeah.
Of the two of them, and Richie looks a little different.
Yeah, he does.
He looked a little different when he was younger.
A little kid.
Yeah, and I was like, no, at 19, 20 years old. I mean, but that's what made the book. But there were some repeated kind of poses, and I said, we can't do this.
Yeah.
Or there was like a shot from a movie, and it was like, and I pushed, and Sally got great. She did a great job. But once in a while, I was a little pushy, and I was like, we got to do something a little different. We got to get a different shot. And occasionally they had to replace shots for whatever reason. But they replaced it with good stuff. There's one, I think, one of John's like solo tour in 97, 98, and he's kind of pointing, dramatically. And I hadn't seen that shot until it ended up in the layout, and I was like, all right, well, that's a cool shot. They did a lot of work. Sally found some amazing stuff. Those old ads from the Aquarian Weekly from Jersey with the Rest and Atlantic City Expressway. There was one photo that we wanted to get and we couldn't. I think it was this guy, Pat Seeley, was a photographer, and he had a great shot of the Atlantic City Expressway. And it was, John's got to be 16, 17 years old, and it's him. I don't know if it's Billy Pontiac or Will Hersick, but it's like 4 or 5 of them, the sax player, the drummer, and man, it was such a great shot. And unfortunately, I think Pat had just moved across country. So by the time we got in touch with him, it was just
too late.
We're going to have him unpack $1 million. We had a low res version of the photo, but we didn't have one. So we had to put that page reproduction of the ad of Atlantic City Expressway playing at some, Irish pub or something. And yeah, Joanna and I were heartbroken. So it was like such do another version of this, which I suspect, if Richie comes back into the band, then we can update the book.
I was going to say, let's do part 2.
You know what? I have a friend who worked actually with Bon Jovi at around the Crush bounce period, and I didn't know it was a friend of mine, but I didn't broadcast it to everyone because I don't want to broadcast I'm working on a book. I was trying to get it done quickly, and I didn't want, with the 30th anniversary of Slippery and Wet coming up, I didn't want all these other people to start trying to do their unofficial books. So I kept it on the downloads as best I could and reached out to the right people, obviously. But yeah, a friend of mine had worked with them and said that they. I think when with the Ally McBeal stuff, John was surprised Rolling Stone wasn't going to write about it. And he's like, it's TV. The Rolling Stone's not going to write you about you being on Ally McBeal. It's just not, they might write about Vonda Shepard and her songs being used on the show, but they're not going to do that. And I think John found some frustration. I think he wanted the acting thing to be bigger, and it was 571 that you really could see what he could do. He's in half the movie. He dies unceremoniously halfway through. But that film, even the director, Jonathan Mostow, who we interviewed for this book, he was convinced at the time he was going to be a star. But then Bon Jovi had the revitalization of their career. And at that point, if you want to be an actor full time, it's going to be full time. And you're going to have to, the band's going to be a side project. And that's a huge gamble to try to take. But U571, it was a really good performance. He showed he had the chops and he could do it. Yeah. There was other movies that he did that were good, but there was just something about that one. Was it Little City? That's another one that he was good as his bartender, womanizing bartender and stuff like that. And
there was it New Year's Eve?
New Year's Eve was more recent, and he was.
He kind of played himself a little bit in that.
Well, he did, and that's kind of the difference with that. Here we got, and they have the photos we got in here where Pay It Forward, where he was an alcoholic, was cool, but Pay It Forward, he only has 2 scenes in that movie, But yeah, no, he's in Little City he was a recovering alcoholic. That's right, and he was actually sleeping with his best friend's girlfriend. you know, and not so great. But he would do that too. He would take on roles that maybe weren't as glamorous,
Right.
you know, because he had that yeah, you know, I'm sure he hated that at the time, the pretty boy image. But it was interesting, and I was talking with some people yesterday at this luncheon for the Montreal Jazz Festival. All things, I was talking to some writers, and they were talking about how they purposely kept him out of the teen magazines. They tried not to have them be like, you know, 17 magazine, because they didn't want them to get pigeonholed with that. And while people are always going to remember them for the hair and for that era, the tribute bands, interestingly enough, don't try to necessarily replicate the 80s.
No,
They actually do later periods
yeah,
almost.
there's a few. There are a few, but yeah, I mean, you're never gonna see me getting into spandex and and putting a wig on or growing my hair long. Yeah, I kind of like.
Well, which period do you guys prefer?
I prefer the crush, bounce, have a nice day period more than anything. The music, I like all the music, but as far as the look of the band, I like right around there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's when I think they got different stylists too. You can
Yeah.
see that something happened. There was a change. The hair got a lot shorter, at least on John's end. I mean, Richard still likes his hair long, but yeah, I mean, and what's up with Richie's website, man? They got to update it. You keep going there, and it's
like
in progress.
2013.
You know, and
I don't know.
but yeah, no, I mean, I hope people like this book. There we go. And you know, they did a really nice job with it. I mean, the original cover for it I didn't like very much, and I really nagged Sterling to change it. And then this one I wasn't sure about either, just because when you do a book, you sit there, like, even with some of the blue borders, I really wasn't sure, because you see it in a PDF. And you're like, I don't know. And that being my first book, I was being cranky and picky. And then I finally saw it, and I was like, yeah, it cover's good. Like, and they probably knew that.
Yeah.
But they knew that. I think the original cover, though, the color scheme had a lot of yellow and blue. And it was like, I think we need something that's a little less 80s looking, even if it's an 80s photo on the cover. And thankfully they did put a newer photo on the back, which was important. Yep. I was worried. I wanted them to put a new photo on the front. But, let's face it, it's a nostalgia thing for a lot of people, and a lot of the fans are still going to remember the 80s period, so you have to put that in the front. But it's good they put the other photo on the back. I think, they did a great job. The layout's great. It's funny, I never actually spoke to the designer once during the whole thing. Oh. But I have this acknowledgement things we scrunched in here in the back. It was crazy, and but yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's a nice looking book, and you can't. I hope that at least I hope that people learn some things. Some new things.
Like I said, I just in the first couple of, I don't want to say chapters, but the first few sections, there's definitely stuff in there that I didn't know about, and I thought I knew a lot about Bon Jovi. So I'm actually glad that I kind of rediscovered this book. Like I told you earlier, it was just strange that this book's been sitting in that Barnes and Noble for all this time, and my picture's in the book.
We didn't get to chat because I chatted with Steve Stages in a
I know Steve
here.
I know Steve.
And but they picked the most of the tribute photos. I don't know how they found you. They just put it in. I was like, okay, but I don't know how that process worked exactly. I wanted to get a shot of Rubik's Cube because they do a Bon Jovi medley.
I know those guys.
The show, but for some reason we just didn't. I don't know why that happened, but because Sherry Martirana, who's the singer in that, she came to we had the book party in November. Actually, we did one in New York City for like some people in the industry, and I wish we did a signing outside in Boston, outside of Boston where I grew up, and we're trying to do something in Jersey. I'm trying to get like a couple of the like Will and Bill and Bruce, and it's tricky, being an unofficial book. Some people are interested, and then some people, like they want. I think I wasn't sure I was going to get tons of Jersey press. We actually did get some things. The Asbury Park Press quoted me in a story recently, but I think some of them didn't want to do it because I suspect they want to interview John at some point. So if they cover this unofficial book, right? That's just my thinking. I don't know what the truth is, but some people don't want to do that because they want to get the interview. And
well, if you ever do something in Jersey with some kind of big thing, you need a band.
Yeah, you know what? I was traducing in Rhode Island. I mean, like.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's a question of being, just bringing in books, bringing in people, and selling some books, and it's fun. I mean, I figure even though the book's been out since November, it still has legs because it's a perennial kind of thing. It's covering so much of the history.
Right. It's not a certain point.
April and May of last year.
Right.
So they didn't change the name of their album. This House Is Not for Sale, so that's still right. And we know that Richie's working on an album, and it's still not out.
It's still not out.
So it's still relevant. I just hope that when we get the chance to if we ever get the chance to upgrade it, I guess, as you would say, not really upgrade it, just revise it for whenever Richie does come back or something big happens or whatever it is. There's always new things. I kept learning things afterwards. I mean, there's stuff that everyone knows. Some people know. Was there anything that you were surprised about? Was there anything about Richie you were surprised about? Since
No,
you are,
because like I said, I'm only a couple of chapters in, but I knew about him being on Zeppelin's label, but I thought it was just him, like his band, and he was the main. But in the book it says that he sang a few songs, and then the other guy sang, and
Dean Fasano, he and Dean Fasano had a couple bands,
right. Well, it was Shock Frenzy, and
then they had Mercy, and if for some reason they just didn't, I don't know what it was. I'm not sure, what. And even in the sidebar that I put in, it's hard to say what exactly happened, and Richie, Richie definitely, that was like the biggest sidebar in the whole book. I love it. We got the Rich Sambora.
Yep, Rich. Yep.
But Message was a cool band, and that EP is worth some money. I'm glad Bruce has put out the Shark Frenzy stuff, but I don't know about the other stuff. You can find you can find the Mercy did some sort of stuff. There's on YouTube, they did like a local Westchester, New York cable show. You can find them, and you can kind of see why that would be appropriate for Zeppelin's label. Some people think it was Message that was on Zeppelin's label,
right?
But given the time frame, it's hard. You can never. That was the trickiest part about this book, is trying to get the time, the years right, because you feel like, oh, this person was here and here, and all this stuff crosses over, and people will actually get their stories wrong. And no one can actually, even the guy, I interviewed Derek Schulman, who signed them. He was in Gentle Giant, and he went in and had a great A&R career at Mercury Polygram. Like, no one's ever completely remember when exactly during 1983 the band actually got signed. Like, they just got signed.
Yeah, it just happened.
And people say, well, he got a deal within 2 weeks, and then Derek's like, no, they did like 4 or 5 showcases before things really started to cook. Like, everyone's going to have their version of events. They played Madison Square Garden, and Tico was in a video interview saying, oh, we haven't even gotten signed yet. I'm like, you probably did get signed at that point, because the album came out in January. Yeah. And even though they could do things quickly in those days, you still had a little bit of time to set things up. So it's kind of like, that's the fun part about doing a book. And when you have those kind of, people's memories are not always accurate, you're going to have a little bit of discrepancy. But it's interesting. That was the most challenging part. And I think, for the most part, the timeline's right. It really shows you the different steps, and their official book, they don't talk about that stuff. Like, he doesn't seem to like to acknowledge the early days as much.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, but
well, they romanticize it. I mean, the fact of the matter is, Tony had an apartment upstairs, and he crashed in the apartment upstairs. I've talked to a couple of people who said they knew people who dated Jon Bon Jovi back then, or they claim they did anyway. And John roughed it, but he still had the connection. He was still in like one of the biggest rock studios in the world, and the Rolling Stones were coming through, and Carly Simon and Bruce Springsteen. And it can't. And if you're smart and you're talented, it can't not rub off on you. Yeah. You can't not rub off on other people. Right. A lot of fans probably still don't know that Runaway's not Bon Jovi. It's a demo with all these other people.
Tim Pierce, I'm a fan of his.
And Hugh McDonald, and it's not it and John, but that video, they're miming to someone else's song, basically, literally, because it's basically George Carrick's song. So that's where I think and maybe that's where part of that criticism comes in for some people. The people that know, they're like, it's just this prefab thing. But I think they prove people wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, and the early stuff holds up.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Do you guys play anything? You guys play anything off the first two records?
We do Runaway. We've done She Don't Know Me. We did Shot Through the Heart a few times. It's hard because
Jack Ponte co-wrote
Tokyo Road.
Tokyo Road. Shot Through the Heart. Jack Ponte co-wrote. That one.
Yep.
And he had a band after that called Surgeon, and they actually also recorded it.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because unless it's a Bon Jovi diehard at our shows, most of the people that show up at these things are just your average, and to play that old stuff, they lose interest because they don't know what it is. But then you get the diehards that say, oh, you got to play this, you got to play this, you got to play this, and you got to kind of find a happy medium.
That's going to be a challenge actually, because there's some cool, like Love Lies, that's like a cool tune in the early days.
to me,
And they said Tokyo Road. That was another
Tokyo,
one.
yeah, we've done that a few times, but not lately, just because it doesn't get as big a reaction. You know how it is. You're in a venue, and
Yeah.
they want to sell beer, and they want to sell this, and they want people engaged. And if you stop playing songs that people don't know,
Hmm.
yeah, you lose.
Well, yeah, Rubik's Cube has the same problem. Sherry was telling me. Sherry was telling me that they have that problem. That they'll do. I mean, some people don't even. Some of the kids. I think some people don't even necessarily know Runaway. They know Runaway was like a hit, but it wasn't as big of a hit. It's still. I mean,
Right.
George Carrick is still. I did a follow up interview with him, and he was just cashing a royalty check because that song is still paying. All these like 30, almost 35 years later. But that being said, well, they're actually 35 years since it was recorded in 82. Yeah, there are people that don't necessarily know that stuff, and that's the thing. That's the thing with any popular band. Like I said, you've got. I argued this, and I asked David Coverdale about this. I said, because I have this thing about fair weather fans. Like the real fans, like when Priest got a new singer, when I got Ripper, I still followed them. I liked a lot of what they did. Maybe it wasn't the same, but I kind of feel like people who, and maybe I'm being snobby about it, but if you're loyal to a band and you love them, you'll go through them. You'll sit with them with the bad periods or the periods that are different. Sometimes you get really interesting stuff when a band changes members, even if it's not the classic lineup. Sometimes you still get interesting music, and I feel like the fair weather fans are the ones that make you popular. The hardcore fans are the ones that are there with you through thick and thin. I asked David Coverdale, I said, the fair weather fans are the ones that kind of came along for the 1987 album and Slip of the Tongue. When Slide It In and Saints and Sinners still blow those albums away. Mm-hmm. The earlier Whitesnake stuff is way better than the stuff that made them popular. I don't begrudge him his success because he'd worked hard for it, but I don't really like those albums. He said, you know what? He said, how can I complain about the fair weather fans? He said, they feathered my nest so nicely to the point that I still live very well today. And I'm like, yeah, they're still going to play, Still of the Night, and they're going to play...
Here I Go Again.
Oh, well, God. And the original version of that's way better.
The
original version of that's way better. And but they had some big hits. Fool for Your Love, and Fool for Your Love was popular. That was also a remake. I mean, they did 3 remakes actually. Again, I don't begrudge them the success, but then again, there's all these fans that when they come to them and when they play England, they can do all the stuff,
all the old stuff,
Love Hunter and Saints and Sinners, and Slide It In. But they come here, they got to do the 2 big albums, maybe a couple Slide It In tunes, and you're out.
Yeah,
that drives me nuts. And Bon Jovi, I'm sure there's plenty of songs they'd love to play that they can't.
They can't. Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff off Have a Nice Day that's really good. The Circle's got a lot of good stuff. I like Bullet. I think that's a cool tune. That's really edgy. Doubt that's going to get played very much. I'm trying to think of other tracks that are like lesser known.
I always liked Story of My Life off of. They played it a few times, but then they obviously they stop and they go back to.
Yeah,
it's basically the same format the last 4 or 5 tours. I hear that from a lot of people that come see us, and they're like they're just playing the same set list over and over. They got the new album, they'll add in 4 or 5 new songs, but they have the same standards around those. But what can they do?
Well, the whole thing too is, I mean, it's like you look up all these bonus tracks too that I mean, actually, I really love Bounce. I love the song Bounce.
Yeah.
I think it's actually really good, and even Undivided off the first song off that album, and One Wild Night, the Latin vibe. You get they did a remix of that, and they were trying to do their Ricky Martin thing. I mean, Desmond Child had been writing for Ricky Martin, so it actually kind of makes sense at that point. Yep. They would do that. There's just a lot of stuff that I feel like doesn't get the attention it deserves. I mean, Dry County still gets played once in a while. I mean, that's an epic tune. It's like 10 minutes, so you can't really. And keep the Faith still gets the love.
Yep.
Are there other keep the Faith tracks that you like?
Well, we do Better Roses. We get requests for that all the time. What's the other? Sleep When I'm Dead. I'm just tired. I'm tired of that song. I even when they do it, I kind of tune it out. What's the other song that I've always loved? If I Was Your Mother.
That was the one song that would get played on it could get played on metal shows, I guess. Actually, but then like, but then their example on that album, In These Arms,
Yeah,
which
we
David
play.
Bryan,
We do that.
that's
We
like
do that
that's
one.
like what I call a love anthem. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a love ballad, it's an anthem.
Mm-hmm.
It's really big. And that's a song I think and that's I think what encouraged David to finally start going into songwriting, with that they had a hit with that in Europe.
Yep.
So it's like, oh, and once again, David Bryan does these big choruses, and it's because these big hooks and harmonies, and you're like, why do they not use that more? They should. That's my sticking point. They'll be sick to death of me saying that, but that's my sticking point. It's like, come on, why don't we have more of that? I kind of feel like there should be a little bit more of that, but whatever. I mean, up until 10 years ago, they were still getting hit singles.
Yeah.
I mean, people know some of the newer stuff, but up until that point, and going out there and the Lost Highway album produced a couple top 30 tracks. I think Have a Nice Day was sort of the last one where you had really like a big anthem type thing, and like Have a Nice Day can still get played today.
Yep.
But even then, even if it stopped 10 years ago, think about the fact that there are bands that go into their career this far, they haven't had a hit single in 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
And good for them for any band to be able to keep going. I think there's a bit of snobbery, like the one hit wonder thing. I remember VH1 had their whole one hit wonder thing, and they get Men at Work and other people, and they sort of make fun of them, and then I'm like, okay, but that's one more hit than you've got.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
And if it's a good song,
it's gonna be there. It's there forever.
It doesn't matter. And some bands, I mean, Men at Work really had like a couple songs actually, but Down Under, it's really like two hits for a lot of people, two hit wonders. And then I think about Twisted Sister, because even like We're Not Going to Take It's the big song. I Want to Rock was also a big song. Right. And for Twisted Sister fans, and Twisted Sister, man, that song has just been like the gift that keeps on giving, man. I saw that like in some sort of commercial with a mariachi band. It's been redone so many times. It's been used so many times. But then that's a band that comes here and they can play a couple thousand people in Europe, but they go to Europe and wow, I mean, they just retire basically from all of that. But I'm sure there'll be a one-off concert once in a while if there's a charity thing or something. Dee is going to keep going, but I mean, they could do 20 dates in a year, and if you're headlining festivals, and those festivals, you're probably making 50, 100K, I imagine.
Oh yeah.
I mean, JJ French joked with me a couple of years ago. He goes, I decided just for the hell of it to see if I could price this out of the market, and I doubled our price, and people paid it. They took it. And I was like, wow. And I don't know that you're going to get young bands today that can do that. No. I really don't know that. No. I mean, Linkin Park and Nickelback, like I like a lot of their stuff. I mean, I became friendly with Mike Kruger, from Nickelback when we did the book, and he told me lots of cool stories. And, I think those two bands still, it'll be curious to see like what happens, are there going to be bands that can stay even at that level in 10, 20 years? I don't know.
It's funny. I did a Nickelback tribute at one point years ago. I like Nickelback, but the draw wasn't there for it.
It's interesting because they're and it's funny that they tour with Bon Jovi, because those are two bands that are actually reviled by a lot of people. I mean,
well, it's funny. I was going to say that there's so many those two bands, those two in particular. Like you'll hear people say, I can't stand Bon Jovi. I don't like it. But when the song comes on, they're singing every word. You see it all the time.
Well, Nickelback, one of the things is I like a lot of their stuff. I mean, I think what it comes down to sometimes is the audience. Both those bands, you can get certain people that you might not like the band's audience. Some people just don't like Nickelback's audience. A lot of it's very bro-ish, and yet they've written serious songs about like they had Too Bad about having the father that wasn't there when they were growing up, and then Never Again about domestic violence. This is in the early days, but once in a while they throw in a song about something more serious. Mm-hmm. It's either nostalgic or it's about a serious topic, and it's got a lot of the raunchy hedonistic aspects to it. It's rock and roll, but Mike takes it with a grain of salt. Like he's like, you know what? I said, what's the funniest thing? And I put this in the story after that. I took part of that interview with the books. It was so big, and it was put on observer.com. I says, what's the funniest thing or the funniest insult you've ever heard? He's like, he's like, someone said that we were music to get herpes by. And he said, I think I literally spit out my coffee when I read this. He's like, there's a little bit of comedic genius in there. He's like, you know what? If you're just it's like basically if you're being a dick, not cool. But he's like, if you're funny about it, he's like, he's all right with it, because I argued that about Hootie and the Blowfish. Like they sold 15 million copies, that actually more at this point of Cracked Rear View, right? Mm-hmm. But for every person album, I guarantee you there's 2 or 3 people who freaking hate those songs anytime they come on. And you're going to have that in almost any situation. The metal bands that we grew up loving, for every every million people who bought that album, there's going to be 5 million people who do not want to hear it because they can't stand that style of music.
Yeah.
I think Bon Jovi is a bit more pop than Nickelback is in certain ways. And I think Nickelback has been raunchy and embraced the hedonistic side of things in a way that Bon Jovi didn't. Bon Jovi teased it on New Jersey. You know, that intro to Social Disease, had Dr. Bon Jovi, and just kind of the whole idea of him, probably fooling around with the nurses, whatever. But it was like, it was safe enough that parents weren't going to get too upset about it. Even Wild in the Streets talking about whatever, losing your virginity in the backseat of a car. Like it wasn't Guns N' Roses. And they've walked that line, and that's, I guess, why they also get criticism too, is that people think they're not rock and roll enough. The Rock Hall of Fame, though, some of the stuff that gets in there, I'm just like, I don't know. But, I've been a Grammy voter for over 10 years, and I vote for a lot of stuff that just never seems to get there. Like, I mean, they finally gave Priest a Grammy, and Megadeth finally got a Grammy this year.
Jethro Tull winning.
Yeah, well, this is there are some categories early on they have committees that the first round only those experts actually pick those things, and I think that's a good idea. It's tough. I'm not, I watch the Oscars now. I mean, I'm a horror movie fan. Like, the Grammys don't like metal very much, and the Oscars don't like horror movies very much. And I don't really care, because at the end of the day, awards are nice, and they help sell albums, they help sell movie tickets. But for real fans, they love the music, they love the movies, they love it no matter what. They love their favorite author, whether or not they're going to win a freaking Pulitzer. And that's really what it's about. And the Bon Jovi fans love the music. I think Triumph the Comic Insult Comic Dog, though, when he did that thing 15 years ago.
Yeah, that was great.
Actually, no, I think it was Crush. I'm trying to remember. I think it was actually Bounce, but
yeah, I think it was. It was Bounce. I think it was Bounce.
Yeah, and he was making fun of them, and they took it. I mean, I wonder what John was thinking, because like Richie was into it, but he was really like, so I hear you're in a vampire movie. Finally, a role that requires you to suck, And some of and of course they picked the biggest douchebags in the audience to highlight, just the drunken idiots that are.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. Like, I think both Bon Jovi and Nickelback, there's a certain fan contingent that other people just don't like, and so they're just not. They don't want to be associated with that. It's kind of like the way I was a metal kid growing up, and I loved comic books and horror movies and Godzilla, and it was not really cool in the 80s with women to be into all those things and be the smart kid. It was strange for a lot of people, especially in the town I was in, and yet, a lot of people, I think, like my best friend, didn't like a lot of metal. But then again, like some of the kids that he didn't necessarily get along with were some of the bullies at that point were metal kids, or they weren't metal kids, actually. The metal kids really weren't bullies. But some kids who wore those T-shirts and liked other stuff as well were like that. The metal kids I knew weren't the bullies, actually. They were a bit of the outcasts. I had one friend at my high school reunion. He's like, it's like, why didn't we hang out more in high school? I was like, was it all the drugs? I'm like, you did drugs? I was like, that's clueless. But I don't know. So hopefully, I mean, the band's going to keep going. Hopefully the book should keep going. Maybe we can hook something up in Rhode Island at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Let me know. We'll do something. Whether we just, you do a book signing or whatever. But it's a good way to wrap this up.
Bon Jovi. So here we go.
Yeah, almost an hour and a half in stereo. There you go. Yeah.
And
pull it over this way a little.
There we go. I'm just getting used to my webcam. I just got my new 27-inch monitor. I'm so happy. I don't have to use reading glasses as much now. It's like I'm seeing you like you're huge.
Big. Oh no, that's not good. All right, well, thank you so much.
But thanks for reaching out.
No,
it was great. I got your email and I was like, that's right. I was like, you guys haven't seen the book yet? And
well, yeah, like I said, it was just I think that's funny. I got a funny story for you.
Yeah, sure.
Having to do with tribute bands that you were asking earlier. We played BB King's one time in New York City. And we played the show. We get out of the show, and in BB King's, there's only one way in, one way out. Basically, is right on the main road there.
Yeah.
So we're coming out. We're carrying stuff in a gear, and we get the cars pulled up right in front. And my singer Joe, he's carrying his guitar case, and he's walking to the car, and this guy comes running over. We're looking at him like, oh no, what's this? Guy comes up to him, and Joe puts the guitar down. The guy starts shaking his hand. Oh man, he goes, I've been a fan for years. I saw you on the Today Show this morning, and this and that. And the rest of us are just standing off to the side looking at it, and we're just laughing. We were like, should we tell this guy? That's not really Jon Bon Jovi right there, but we just let the guy have his day. Stuff like that happens all the time. It's funny.
But that's great though, because sometimes I look at I go to New York Comic Con every year, and now once again, I was growing up, comic books sold more, but they weren't as cool necessarily. Now it's like geek culture is huge.
Yeah.
I like to joke when I go and I see women in their 20s who are into all this stuff. I'm like, thanks for skipping my generation. Appreciate that. But it's great that you've got it's much more mixed. It's more mixed gender wise, racially. It's very cool. But the level of fandom can be startling in a way. But you need people like that. You don't want somebody crazy obsessed with stuff. But you have people like that. They spend all year in their costume. It's like people who will. It's like Mike was telling me that the fans when Nickelback toured with Bon Jovi overseas, that there was this whole group of hot women that would be like in the front for Bon Jovi, and then they started coming to Nickelback shows, and they have now the engine that shows up for their shows when they're over there, and that's kind of fun. You need to have passionate fans, otherwise, obviously you want to make a living doing your art, but it's great to have people, and in tribute bands, it's I can imagine sometimes to be a thankless job, because you could do a great gig and people are like, oh, that's awesome. But they don't realize how much you've put into it, because you're not even just being a good band. You've got to replicate something that someone else has done and become famous for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot of things you have to pay attention to.
I mean, you got the look down. Like I said, I got this thing. I'm like, this is Richie Sambora knockoff. Like, what's he doing? And I'm like, he's in Bon Jersey. Well, that makes total sense.
Here's another story for you before we wrap this up. On stage, and my name is Rich. First of all, that's not a stage name. So
that was hilarious. That's great.
Joe will call me Richie on stage, and then we get off stage. We meet the people and say hi. And I can't tell you how many times. If I had a nickel for every time this has happened, they'll come over and say, "So what is your real name?" And I'll say, "It's Rich. It's Rich." No, not what he was calling you on stage. What is your actual name? I'll say, "That's my name." And sometimes they believe you, sometimes they don't. It's just the way it is.
It's interesting. It's that's cool though. Hopefully you guys be down in New York at some point.
Yeah, we're actually doing. We just booked something today in Hopewell Junction, New York.
Mm-hmm.
It's some big charity thing for a cancer thing for kids.
That's cool.
There's a bunch of bands. I know there's a Billy Joel tribute playing. I'll get that information to you it's June 10th.
Okay, and there's Billy Joel starting to see. There's a thing called Big Shot, a tribute to Billy Joel.
Yeah, it's not them. It's Songs in the Attic.
Okay.
The other one. So.
It's a lucrative business, and and after all these bands have retired, I mean, I think Bon Jovi's got a while to go, but there's a lot of these bands we grew up with, man. I mean, Sabbath, those guys are 70, and it was sort of about time, and people get sad. I'm like, they were around for almost 50 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing. You got to, and I think you have to appreciate it. I think we're kind of spoiled in America. Like, people come around a lot and tour, and you go to Brazil or you go to Japan, you go to places people don't tour as much. Man, those fans go crazy.
Yeah,
and they appreciate it, and I think we have to appreciate it more often. That if there's a certain band you like, the only hard part, honestly, are the ticket prices.
Yeah.
Bon Jovi, it's expensive to go see them. It's not. It ain't cheap.
No.
So I guess that's where you guys are doing
that's
people.
Where, the people that can't afford Bon Jovi, they come see us, or one of the other guys, the other tribute bands.
No, they're supposed to come see you.
Well,
they're the other guys, right?
No, but we're friends with some of the other Bon Jovi tributes.
I'm sure.
They're all good guys, So
right on.
Everybody's trying to do the same thing. But thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Podcast will be going up hopefully later today on iTunes. I'll let you know. I'll get you all the information, and
nice.
I'll link your website and all that stuff. And then the video, if anybody that wants to see it, you'll get to see some cool pictures. That'll be up in the next few days.
Yeah.
So,
and the book, right now the book's on Amazon. I mean, it lists for 28, but they're selling it for like 18.
Oh, there you
go. It's a deal. And
I paid 28.
There you go. Well, you told me that.
It was worth it. It was definitely worth it.
Well, thanks. I mean, I'll see it. I should see if they have any other copies they can send you. Because I mean, it's.
Yeah, the guys in the band would like a copy if you.
Yeah, I'll check in with them, with Sterling. Because also, honestly, the signing I had in Massachusetts was great because I had a lot of friends come out. I mean, I had a lot of friends who paid for it. My girlfriend bought a copy for herself, and her sister, the first one I ever signed, her sister had a charity event in Jersey that David Bryan, I think, I don't know if he showed up. He was scheduled to show up at. I don't know if he managed to make it to that. I don't think he did, but I appreciate that because it's tough sometimes. People, as a lot of people say, "Oh, we can give you a copy of your book." It's like, go out and buy my book. Like, in the industry, if you're doing press or something, it's one thing, but it's just so funny. Like, a friend of mine wrote a book and he said, "Yeah, it's surprising like how people think all of a sudden you're making money."
Yeah.
You know, they think, oh, you got an easy street now. It's like, you know what, you got a book out, but unless it's a bestseller, you know, you're still working it and you're going to make some money, but it's not what you think it is. But it was great to do. It's a great experience.
Well, it's the same thing with this podcast. It's pretty new, you know, and I've been just pushing it. So I'm going to take this podcast. I'm going to go to all the Bon Jovi Facebook groups and, you know, all those fan groups and just say, hey, if you want to learn some stuff, here's the podcast.
Well, there's one site here I gotta give a shout out to because I believe it's called Bon Jovi Always in My Heart.
Oh, and yeah.
That guy, is it what man or woman? I'm not sure. I'm actually going to reach out to them because they've actually reposted a lot of my stuff. And when I posted it, Eddie Trunk gave the book a shout out. He put it up on his or her page, their page, I'll say. And man, it got thousands upon thousands of views.
Wow.
Like it's just, you know, and there is I think a demand for this book in Latin America. I think that, you know, hopefully they can get a Spanish language edition of the book out. And when a bit over 50,000 words, I think 50,000 is sort of the limit for foreign editions. It depends on the language. I think Russian and German, the words seem a little bigger. German have those uber words, and so everything is like elongated. But you know, there seems to be like a lot of fans in Latin America. So I'm hoping we can get a book down there because it seems like there's all these people interested. They share it, they repost it, they heart it, and it's clear that they can make some money.
Right? Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I'll share it everywhere that I can. My website.
Please do. Thank you.
Podcast site. You can share it, whatever you want to do with it. So
stay in touch.
Yeah, definitely. Come out to Rhode Island, and I'll be there.
Well, yeah, I go home to Boston a lot, so it's close. Nice. It'll be close by.
Definitely.
Grab a drink, check it out. All right, man.
Cool. Thank you.
Well, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.